Hello, dear friends. My name is Sofia Dorinskaya. I am the president of the International Bureau for Human Rights in Mental Health and the head of the Sofia Dorinskaya Center for Medical Information. Today, I continue to run the blog of the International Bureau and the Center for Medical Information. And today, we will discuss the mechanism of action of a drug called Phenibut. In order for us to understand how this drug works, I will once again draw a model. The junction of two nerve cells, the so-called synapse. Now I'll make it bolder. I'll take the so-called synapse. And we have already discussed the mechanisms of action of some substances that affect the brain and nervous tissue in general. And I told you about the substances that are involved in the transmission of nerve impulses, the so-called neurotransmitters. And today, we will talk about a substance that inhibits nerve impulses. That is, this substance stops it. This biological substance, this natural substance, which stops the conduction of nerve impulses. And it's called gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's a long name, but for short, it's called gamma-aminobutyric acid. Naturally, in nature and in any living organism, there must be not only mechanisms for conducting nerve impulses. By analogy with an electric wire, we don't always have the electricity turned on. Sometimes it needs to be turned off. Similarly, in a biological living organism, there is always a mechanism for stopping the nerve impulse. What characterizes this mechanism? In biology, in nature, under natural conditions, this mechanism is never permanent. So, you forget when needed and unlock it when necessary. And in this way, the action of gamma-aminobutyric acid regulates nerve conductivity. So, Phenibut is a derivative of gamma-aminobutyric acid. Therefore, the effect of Phenibut is the blockade of nerve impulses. If we talk about stronger substances aimed at blocking nerve impulses, those are antipsychotics. I told you about them. You can watch it in the video. I explained to you how antipsychotics block nerve impulses by drastically changing the cell's biochemistry, but Phenibut works as a synthetic version, with certain modifications of gamma-aminobutyric acid, and it blocks the nerve impulse. Why? Because when the nerve impulse is blocked, there is an accumulation of those very neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, dopamine, and so on. And why is this necessary? When they accumulate, when the level of these neurotransmitters increases, their mood improves. A person's mood improves chemically. And the truth is that this is exactly how the mechanism works, namely the blocking of the nerve impulse and an increase in the amount of neurotransmitters by 5 to 10 times. This is exactly the mechanism of action that some drugs have. That's why, when a person takes a drug, they feel good. Colors become brighter and more vivid. Life's problems seem to disappear. The person has more energy, and so on and so forth. So, the derivative of gamma-aminobutyric acid, that very Phenibut, actually blocks the transmission of nerve impulses, and this is where these neurotransmitters accumulate. According to the RLS reference book, the Drug Reference Guide, Phenibut is prescribed to people with depressive conditions. Phenibut is prescribed to people with anxiety, fear, and so on. Also, according to officially published data, Phenibut has a certain effect on blood flow. It is said to improve blood fluidity. To put it simply, blood fluidity. That's why it's claimed that it improves the blood supply to nerve tissue. Well, naturally, if the blood becomes thinner, it penetrates the capillaries better, and so on, and so on. What can I tell you about prescribing such a substance? I'll say it again. I studied. We were the last graduating class that studied under the Soviet program, and I want to tell you that prescribing such substances is justified in cases of real brain tissue pathology. For example, what is called a stroke, or a brain infarction, or an ischemic stroke, when blood doesn't reach a certain part of the brain and a real catastrophe happens. Basically, you need to dissolve that area and improve blood flow and so on, because the person is truly in a depressive state due to their physical pathology. These kinds of mood improvement effects are justified. But listen, to prescribe a substance just to a person who has anxiety, fear, just because it's a certain emotion, it's actually teaching a person to experience pleasure with the help of a pill. It's the same vicious mechanism. It's the same upbringing of moral vice. To experience pleasure without making any effort. That's exactly why drug addicts degrade. That's exactly why it's considered this way. Drug addiction is always considered a moral vice because a person gets used to experiencing a good emotion without making any effort at all. A person doesn't even try to find out what leads them to one disorder or another. He doesn't improve his work skills. He doesn't improve his communication skills. He doesn't deal with the problems in his life. He just takes a pill, and he just feels better. The worst thing is when they tell you that this should be given to completely normal and adequate children, because the reason for prescribing this substance. So I read how they tell moms, your child has hyperactivity. Your child has poor blood supply to the brain. Moms, poor blood supply to the brain must be proven by objective research methods. Because a child's joy, restlessness, unwillingness to communicate with someone, aggressiveness, irritability. These are emotions that primarily show that something is not right in the child's environment. Adults exist to observe the child, communicate with them, ask them what's going on, and help them resolve life's situations, and not to teach the child that they can just take a pill and something will change. You know, that's actually enough. This is a very serious, I would say, a very strict biological mechanism. You need to be absolutely aware that you are interfering with the biological mechanisms that regulate nerve conduction. That's exactly why Phenibut is not prescribed to pregnant women or women who are breastfeeding, because, to be honest, if you start disrupting the nerve impulse, logically speaking, I can say that, for example, in a developing fetus, the nervous system simply won't form. You'll just ruin everything here, you understand? And the use of such substances should really be justified. Justified by medicine. You must have indisputable evidence in your hands that your child, has had a stroke in order to prescribe such substances. The same substance is used in diseases like, for example, Alzheimer's, or in similar cases. This substance is often prescribed to children with cerebral palsy, especially when they have hand tremors. When these nerve impulses occur, they just stop the impulse. But I can tell you that there is a gentler, safer way to improve nerve conductivity and allow the body to restore nerve impulse transmission one way or another. And there are absolutely safe substances for this. I'm not going to say that this will happen just like that, instantly. The body is generally something that needs time to adjust. But it's absolutely certain that the use of substances like Phenibut must be very strictly justified from a medical point of view. Your test results must be so indisputable, so unambiguous, especially when it comes to children, because you are essentially chemically cutting off a child's nerve conductivity. And I want to say once again, dear parents, please realize one simple thing. The diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a fabricated psychiatric diagnosis, which aims to explain ordinary life situations with a non-existent illness and to have a reason to sell you a pill. And considering that you are, roughly speaking, creating a tool for your child, you are teaching your child the habit of continuing to take a pill whenever they feel bad. Instead of learning to solve life's problems, you are teaching your child the habit of being an addict. To be continued. I hope I answered the question, what is Phenibut? Most likely, it's a good substance. It's a good medication, under one simple condition, that it's used by the right doctor, in the right place, at the right time. And for those conditions that are proven and that really require exactly this kind of pharmacological correction. This was Sofia Dorinskaya with you. All the best. Goodbye.